Is this okay here? A little louder? Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to make a series of confessions. I'm deaf. I wear hearing aids, so when people see that, they say, well, you're not deaf. I am deaf. I'm what's called oral deaf. I don't use American Sign Language. And the minute you turn your face away from me, it all goes blank. I think that's deaf, right? That's the first thing. So I can't hear myself. So, you know, if I'm speaking too softly, just go like this, and I know we're not at a revival meeting. And the second confession I have is that while I'm on a roll here, I'm blind. I really am. I will show you my CNIB card. I get on the bus for free. There are people say, well, you seem to see. As I said to my ophthalmologist last time I had an eye test, she got it on the door of her office, and she said, what can you see? And I said, the door. Stop asking the same question every time I go. It's not going to get better. So, consequently, being a good teacher, at least I thought I was, I hyper-prepared. I had my notes all blown up to about 24 Arial fonts. I getting everything organized. This was a last-minute trip. I have other things that I'm trying to do. And I get to the hotel, and I open up my bag, and I don't have my notes. I do have my books. And that then became an engagement of the entire hotel in helping me scan the documents large enough so that I was back to what I started with. There's many beginning teachers, and one of the things you have to learn, I think, to enjoy the job, and I did for 30 years, one of the hardest jobs I've ever had and one of the best jobs, sometimes in the same moment, was to enjoy your mistakes. And I took acting lessons, and that was the advice I got from the actor director who taught me, was to make your mistakes part of the performance. Before I get started, I want to thank the editors of a beautiful book. If you haven't seen it, please do order it and certainly use it in your courses. There is a lot of wisdom in the book and a lot of heart as well. The editors worked so hard to make the book a reality and then make it public in events like this, and I hope to be able to take part in more of them. I'm particularly honored to be in this book. I have 3 pieces. One is an extremely personal essay about my mother. My mother was bipolar, had bipolar illness. And we did not know this for many years. She had psychotic episodes and things like that. For many years, I hated her. And the empathy comes in when I learned to understand my mother and that she had a disease. And I was instrumental in her seeking treatment and getting treatment. I had to fight the medical profession, I'm sad to say, to do that. And then we had a relationship, and out of that relationship, I wrote a novel. It's not an autobiographical novel by any means, but it was a sense of trying to recover my mother, and I wrote an interesting exercise this morning, because they're hell, aren't they, to write from the point of view of the person you don't like. That's also a therapy technique that's used by psychiatrists. I'm very proud to say that since the pieces were accepted, my publisher brought out this. This is my life writing. It's about 35 years worth of work. It's all different kinds of poems, so please don't hold it against me by what I read today, okay? What I'm going to read today is a bit of a downer. It's a difficult poem in a lot of ways, so I apologize if I bring the jovial mood down a little bit. The title poem is about a little boy who learned from his uncle, who's a forest ranger, about how rivers are made. And that was my definition of poetry, how rivers are made. Rivers are made. They come from places. They're created. And I learned the secret of that from an uncle of mine who was a forest ranger. He named a creek from which the river is made. And that's the story of 2 O'Clock Creek. I wrote this poem about 25 years ago. I think, graduated from university. I always like to say I did my master's program at Harborfront. I went to hear every author that was there. I heard Raymond Carver, who, by the way, was a very, very funny guy. He's dark stories, but he's hysterical. He had to stop reading after each sentence because the audience was laughing so hard they wouldn't let him go on. I heard, and this author is important to the poem I'm going to read, somebody mentioned Gabriel Marquez. I was in love with the South Americans. It was such a different world, and yet not from the world in which I came. If you're deaf, English is not your first language. Confusion is. And you learn to live in a state of confusion. And I turn to writing, I think, for that, to try to make sense of a world that doesn't make any sense. And one of the lines out of my novel, the little deaf boy says about hearing people, they talk like snakes. They hiss. I took speech therapy, and intellectually, I know the word M-A-T-H and M-A-S-S are two different words. They're not to me. And that wonderful phrase that somebody said, "Inagata de Vita," was supposed to be in the Garden of Eden. I hear everything that way. It's all Inagata de Vita to me, okay, except when I read. I heard Caroline Forche, who was a Hispanic writer from the States. How many of you have read her poem, Caroline Forche, The Colonel? Have read? If you haven't, please run out and read it. It changed poetry for the next 20 years. Because what it showed us was poetry could be prosaic and political and incorrect and full of shard and detail and lyricism and horror. Caroline Forche detailed the atrocities that were happening in Nicaragua. It started to change what happened there. I was in the audience. I was blown away because it was so unlike all the poetry I'd ever studied, and this is unlike a lot of the poetry I've written. The second thing, Margaret Atwood was in the audience as well, and I know that because Margaret never spares us an opinion on anything, does she? She wrote a long article on Caroline Forche in this magazine. You can find all this stuff. It's all in bibliographies if you care about this, and I do. She wrote a wonderful essay, and then she wrote a poem called Note Toward the Poem That Cannot Be Written. To a young, deaf, Scottish working class guy, that sounded like a challenge. So, having been inspired by Forche and having been squashed, I think, a little by Atwood, I thought, how can I describe the thing that cannot be written, cannot be said? I grew up in my own family. My family, some people unkindly would say white trash, but the other side of the family had a lot of money, wrote books. 5 of the family were lawyers, including one of the first women called to the bar in upstate New York. So that's the spectrum of the family. There's incest. Alcoholism is like common colds in my family. Okay? Abuse of every kind imaginable. And I grew up with this. I'm a watcher. I'm a deaf guy watching all these people and thinking, this world doesn't make any sense because everybody's smiling. And people ask me, did you learn to read lips? And I said, hell no. I watched their eyes and I watched their actions. And if you are a good teacher, and I'm hearing lots of good teaching here, you will learn to watch the eyes. What science says is the information is not necessarily in the facial expression, so that's there. 40% is in tone, and I can hear tone. I may not hear the word, but I can hear the tone, condescension. The other is in the neurons of the eyes, which both receive and exchange information. The top investigators in the United States know this. They have taught themselves this, and it's now being protocoled so they can teach the rest of it. I got off on a little lateral there, but my point is there's a lot of stuff that's digested in this. One type of poetry is sheer emotion, pure rage, pure anger, pure passion. The other spectrum of it is pure thought. I don't know about you, but I like to use as much of the stuff I have in the kitchen as possible. It doesn't always work, but boy, it's sure fun. This is not going to be a fun poem, so I apologize for that in advance, but I hope you'll understand the spirit of what I'm saying here, because I think it's about us. Towards a new definition of pornography, and if I can just explain this for a second, I use pornography as a literary conceit. So what I'm proposing is there are other things which I think are pornography, violence. The other one is hypocrisy. The other is objectivity. I'm sorry, but there are some situations in which we should not be objective. and yet we are taught to be objective is the highest form of human existence in the minds of some people. Okay, Hunter, shut up and read the poem. Towards a new definition of pornography. 1. Young men and women with degrees in English literature, living in fashionably seedy districts, writing poetry in sexually inclusive language about rape, murder, and wife-beating, all of which happened to other people. 2. In urban club rooms, churches, and universities, anyone engaged in politically correct discussion on pornography, violence, or Nicaragua. This is the true story, the poem that can be written. 3. My mother with a knife. This is where the definition gets personal. I am 17 years old. She stepped between my sister and my alcoholic father. That night, I leave home. 1 year later, she does. Something Margaret Atwood knows nothing about. 4. In divorce court, the judge, 2 lawyers, all of them male. My mother gets $1 a year and social assistance. My father buys a new house. 5. My teenage brothers in jail for minor offenses, none of them malicious. On the other side of the thick plexiglass window, their faces bruised. The elevator in the police station stopped between floors. A telephone book applied to the abdomen, the ribs. Tonight is Friday. Monday morning, there will be no visible damage before the judge. 6. The police visit my mother looking for my brothers. It is 4 a.m. This happens often. My sisters are stopped for identification checks. This too happens often. This is what they do to the lower classes in your country. Tonight, somewhere in the suburbs, you are talking about us. Some of you are writing poems, taking donations, or making a film. You feel okay about this. And my mother now goes to your churches. She has forgiven you. I have not. Actually, I have. The act of writing was a mountain climber in my younger days. I was a tree climber. That was my trade before I became a teacher. When you mountain climb, you hammer a piton into the rock. You take the carabiner on your rope. That's the thing that you use to hook your water bottle to your knapsack. The original purpose was to hook a rope to. Anyway, you clip it on, and then you go on to the next point, and you go on and on and on. And it's not that you don't ever climb the same route again, but you're always at a different vantage point. I'm no longer the young man who wrote that poem. It was extremely difficult to get back in character, and I am acting. I was not acting when I wrote this. Thank you very much for your attention. You're a lovely group.